This is an iPhone. I've been waiting for 32 weeks to say that in the sermon. I got an excuse to get it into the sermon. So this is an iPhone. I remember the first time I ever saw one of these things. It was either 2007, 2008, and my cousin had one. And he was playing around with it, and I had heard a little bit about the hype, and so I was like, can I see that thing? And I started playing around with it and seeing all the things that it could do, and I was just blown away, and I had to have one. So I went to the store and I asked how much it cost, and they told me it was about $200 or something like that. And I said, okay, that's worth it. I think I'll get one. They said, well, you also have to have a minutes plan. Okay, well, I understand that. You need minutes to talk to people. And there's also a messaging plan in order to send messages. And then a data plan. You got to have one of those. And there's also a 2-year contract. And I added up all the costs, and I figured, it's worth it. I'm going to get it. And so I got the phone. And it's really remarkable. I mean, this thing is terrific. It can do all kinds of things. It's got more computing power, and it's faster than the computer that sat on my desk all through college. And it fits in my pocket. I'm able to access information all over the world about people, things going on that I'd have no idea. But despite all of that, there were some hidden costs that I didn't expect about this thing. There's something called externalities. That's an economics term. And an externality is a cost or a benefit that's paid or reaped by a third party. So just to explain what an externality is, air pollution is an externality. The people who live around a factory pay the price in their health by breathing air pollution, even though they may have nothing to do with the manufacturing of the product or the consumption of the product. It's just an externality, and it's something that isn't often counted in the cost for some of our goods. There's other externalities with this particular phone. One of them has a name. It's called Candy Crush. So some of you know what that is, and some of you don't, so I'll explain. Candy Crush, it comes off like this innocent game that you can play on this phone. But what it really is this addictive black hole that you can throw entire hours into and entire chunks of your day, and you'll never, ever get them back. Ever. So when I see people who are glued to this thing instead of glued to their friends and family and things that are going on, I'm reminded of that particular externality, the time and attention that's paid by my children because of this thing. There are other externalities, of course, of which some of us may or may not be aware. They're a little more insidious. I didn't know this, but in order to make a cell phone, you need what are called rare earth minerals. And oftentimes those are mined in countries far, far away from here by women and children in conditions that are indistinguishable from slavery. That's some of the things that it takes to make this thing and to make it as cheap as it is in order for me to have it. Some of you might know that these things are manufactured in China in labor conditions that aren't the same as they are in the United States. And so you have young people who work 14 to 16-hour days sometimes in horrible conditions and for a wage that would be illegal to pay somebody here in order for me to have this at the cost that I pay for it. And these questions about, the ironic thing about all of that is that I wouldn't know anything about rare earth minerals. I wouldn't know anything about labor conditions in China if it wasn't for this phone. I mean, honestly, the reason I am able to access information about people across the globe is because of this. And so this is the essence of my love-hate relationship with technology, that there are things that are good that come out of these devices, and there are things that are horrible that come out of these devices. And if we want to make some type of blanket judgment about whether this thing is good or bad, whether we should have them or not, I mean, the answer is just not that clear. Now, the world seems to be that way. There's all types of questions about what we should do as a society. And right now, there's this situation that's going on in the Middle East that I'm sure a lot of us are aware of, and we see these things happen, and we don't know what's the right thing to do. We don't know what is going to be the right thing to respond to particular situations that aren't going to create more harm than good. So should we invade a foreign country to stop a dictator from hurting his own people? Can we afford that kind of intervention? Can we afford to do nothing? There's no clear answers, but I, like a lot of people, when I see other people suffering across the world, my heart opens up and it says, we've got to do something. I feel like we have to do something. Can we do something about this? Now, when we ask these questions, of course, we have to add up the costs. And in the passage that we heard this morning, Jesus is asking us to do a similar thing about considering the costs. Jesus has this crowd of people following him around like groupies on the Jesus tour. They're following him around, and some of them probably don't really know anything about Jesus. They just saw a crowd of people following Jesus and some of their friends, and they're like, hey, where are you going? Oh, we're going to go follow Jesus. Jesus, who's that? Oh, he's this great preacher. He's saying all kinds of things that you've never heard before, and the Pharisees are all up in arms. You really ought to come check it out. Why don't you join us? And they're like, hey, why not? What do I got to lose? So you got this big crowd of people following this very popular man, and he stops them, and he turns around, and he says, now listen, this ain't going to be no party. If you're going to follow me, you need to really consider what the costs are of following me. And then he says something that almost doesn't even sound right. He says, you need to hate your mother and your father and your brother and your sister and your wife and your kids and even your life. And you need to pick up your own cross and follow me. And you know what they do to people on those crosses. Now, when we read this, we're taken aback a little bit by the harshness of his words. And when I was studying this passage, a lot of the biblical scholars and the commentators that I was reading, they all go way out of their way to soften this passage. They say, listen, this is not one of those phrases that you should take literally. This is what they call Semitic hyperbole. It's a literary device to use an over-the-top exaggeration to just drive home a point. And what they say is that the point is that you have to put Jesus first in front of everything in order truly to be a follower of him. Even those things that you get your identity from, such as your family. Now, I'm not real interested in softening the passage. Because I think that when we look around at the world today, and we look at these things that shock us and horrify us, we need an equally strong message to meet it. And so I'm not interested in softening this passage. The first thing I want to do is consider it literally. Can we follow Jesus? I mean, Semitic hyperbole or not, can we really afford to pay the price? Can we really put Jesus in front of everything, including our families and even our own lives? Are we willing to suffer the way that he suffered in order to follow him? Well, we could look at his disciples. Are we able to do it? Well, were they able to do it? I don't know. Let's see. How many of his disciples, the ones that saw him and followed him and listened to him and heard the words of Jesus come directly from Jesus' mouth, how many of them were following behind him with their crosses as they went up to be crucified on the hill at Calvary? How many? Or you don't even have to go that far. How many of them were just standing next to him in solidarity at the trial? How many? How many of those people that were in the crowds, that big horde, the crowd of people that were following around, how many of them made it all the way to the end with him? How many of them followed him all the way to the cross and to his execution? Well, I need to double check my Bible, but I think the answer at last count was 0. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we respond to what it is that we see in the world today? How is it that we respond to the seemingly impossible call to follow Jesus? Well, the world will give you one answer. The world will say, yes, of course, there is suffering. There is suffering in order for you to enjoy these toys like this, but they bring great things. Yes, there is suffering in the world for you to enjoy the lifestyle that you have. However, the problems that technology create can be fixed by technology. We can innovate our way out of these problems. Things are getting bigger and better all the time. We can pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps and we can fix these problems that we have created. And then if you are astute or wise enough to look around and consider to yourself that, well, maybe you can't fix what's broke with what's broke, then the world will tell you, you're right, the world is broken beyond repair. So just drop out. Just get apathetic. Don't even try. Embrace it. It's inevitable. Better yet, get some entertainment. Tune into a reality television show or pick up your iPhone and play a little bit of Candy Crush. Just tune out from the world and don't look at what's going on, because there's nothing you can do about it anyway, so don't even try. Or you can turn on the television news and you can see God's kids arguing with God's kids about which one of God's kids are really the problem. Because the problem is them over there, it's not us. They're the problem. We could just get them right, and we could just do something about them. Then everything would be okay. Get angry, the world will say, about these problems that we see. Fortunately, that's not God's answer. Fortunately, in the midst of all of this bad news, there is good news. And that's always the way that it is with God. You see, the first thing that God would say to us is, just because something is not able to be fixed by us doesn't mean that it can't be fixed. Say that again. It is arrogant and self-centered and hubristic to believe that just because we can't fix a problem, that it can't be fixed. After all, the creator of the universe, the creator of you and of me and of all of this, is able and willing, and it is possible for that power to come in and to fix all of the broken places in this world. So just because you think that it can't be fixed by you doesn't mean that it is unfixable. God says that we are called to discipleship. And to be called to discipleship means that we are called to make a difference in the world. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can't help but to make a difference. It's literally impossible to not make a difference. If someone tells you that the problems of the world are such that you should just drop out of the world, that you should just turn a blind eye, that you should just remove yourself from the world, recognize that is a false option. You can't extract yourself from the world. For better or for worse, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, you are making a difference in the world. And to be a disciple is to make a difference. But then we look at this passage and it says that, well, we can't afford the cost of discipleship. We can't afford this price that has to be paid. Well, now think about that for a moment. When Jesus was walking to Calvary and he was carrying his cross and he turned around and he saw no one behind him, did he stop the whole thing? Did he say, you know what, this whole human experiment has been a failure, I'm out of here? As he was walking to the cross and he turned around, he said, where were all those people who said they were going to follow me to the end? Peter, where are you? The one that said you would follow me all the way to the cross. Where did you go? Did he snap his fingers and just go right back up to heaven? No. And just as sure as we know that even though we can't fix a problem, that it is still able to be fixed and healed by God, just as that is true, we know that just because we can't pay the price of being disciples, it still has been paid for us. We cannot pay the price to be disciples, but Jesus has paid that price so that when we still decide to follow Christ, even though we know we are going to fall short, that same grace that fell upon us to save us from sin and from death will save us in that situation too. And so what is discipleship? What does that look like? What does it mean to make a difference? What does it mean to follow Christ knowing that we cannot follow Christ? Well, it means that when the world is burning around you, that you stand up strong in your faith. People are going to be watching you. People aren't going to be coming to you when things are good, but when things are real bad, people are going to be watching you to see if you really believe the things that you say that you believe. When things are good, you might not get much. You might even get a little bit of criticism for some of these fantastical things that we claim in Christ rising from the dead. But when things are bad, when things are hurting, when somebody is suffering and they don't know if they're going to live or die, or when they look across the world and they see a world burning down and they don't understand how it's going to be held, they're going to be looking to you to see what's going on. And they're not going to judge you by whether or not you can fix the world. That ain't your job. God is the one that fixes the world. We are the ones to be the hands and feet of the one who fixes the world. And they're going to look to us, and they're going to look to see if we really have that hope and faith and belief in what we say. And a disciple will not be one that turns to someone else when they are weak and heavy laden and say, "You need to pray." A disciple is one that other people come to when they're weak and heavy laden and say, "I need you to pray for me. I need you to pray for me. I need to take that hope that you have. I need to take that faith that you have, that beyond time that God will resurrect us, that God's love will cover us all, that all the sin and death and evil and suffering in the world will be appended, and even though we don't know how that's going to happen, I need some of that hope that you have, that it will happen. Because I can see in the way that you live, the way that you stand in the midst of all of this violence and hate and vitriol, and you stand firm in the middle of it, and you say, I still believe in the resurrection." People are going to be looking to you for that hope. That's what discipleship looks like. It's when we are in a world of violence, we prepare a table of brotherhood in its midst. That when we are in a world of violence, a world that calls the world of violence inevitable, that these are things that we cannot avoid, that we will stand in the midst of it and say that all of you with your weapons, all of you with your weapons of mass destruction cannot stop the resurrection. In the words of the Pablo Neruda, the poet, you can pluck all the flowers, but you cannot stop the spring. We are called to be hope in a world that needs hope. We are called to show the world what peace looks like in a world that has none. We are called to be disciples. And when we recognize that we can't even pay that price, that we can rest assured because the price has already been paid for us. Amen.